Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 37th episode of the Soccer Scene with myself, Adrian, and joined by the ever-reliable Noel O'Connor as we enter the end of what's been a marathon season, or we hope won't be the full end, Noel, I suppose, of it yet, but we're coming to the back end of it as we enter the playoff series with Treaty United, obviously, coming up two legs this week, Wednesday and Saturday, against Waterford FC in the first round, which we call the semi-final stage, I suppose, at first division stage of the playoffs. Noel, just to recap before we go into what is a huge week for the club, to recap last week's result, obviously they finished off the regular season, Treaty United, with a 2-0 defeat at home against Wexford FC. It was the first defeat against Wexford this season. We expected a lot of changes, Noel, to the starting 11. We weren't disappointed. You know, the likes of Joe Collins, Colin Conroy, Martin Coughlin, Success Erdogan, and Darren Collins all made their way into the team. Only 4 survivors, and then a couple of them were replaced as well. Do you think, Noel, that any of the players from that team on Friday last week made any late stake for a place in the playoffs team?
No, I think it was not. There wasn't much to remember. I don't think a lot of that game will make the highlights reel for Treaty. When they're wrapping up the season, I thought it was probably a game that Wexford were always going to win. It was probably something that they had to tick off their to-do list, is to beat Treaty. They probably would feel, a bit unfortunate that it was the first time this season that they did beat them. And, when you look at the table, then at the end, there was only 3 points between them. But I thought Waterford were full value for the win. They certainly created a lot of chances. I suppose the only disappointing thing, watching them from their point of view, was how kind of wasteful they were with the chances that they created. But certainly played a nice brand of football. They moved the ball quickly. And certainly a little bit like Waterford, I thought they certainly attacked in numbers down the flanks, and they were full value. But you couldn't really read into it in terms of Treaty, as we said, with only four starters. I didn't think anyone really stood out on the night, and probably something that we'll touch on in a while. There, it was interesting to see that Lee Devitt was placed left full in the absence of Mark Ludden.
Yeah, certainly was. We mentioned Wexford, obviously, closing the gap in terms of points, obviously, to Treaty. They'll still obviously be disappointed that they haven't made the playoffs, considering. But, there is, I suppose, murmurings from the southeast that they're expecting an absolute all-out onslaught for the playoffs next year, at least, Noel.
Yeah, certainly looked the second time, or maybe even third time, that their manager has resisted overtures from other clubs, the latest being Bohemians. He's signed up for next season. I know they've signed 11 or 12 of the current squad already, and he's in talks with maybe seven or 8 players, and the word was that 5 of them, if they do sign, would go straight into the team. They have a new backer down there, and their budget has gone, between the mid 2000s, if you like, up to the mid 4000s for next year. So certainly they will be ambitious enough. I certainly think on his list he'll certainly have to sign a striker. I'm not sure Dini Cork will be there next year. I thought he'd a heck of a guy that was finishing up, and certainly with the chances that they made on Friday, they'll certainly need a striker to convert some of them into goals, maybe to propel them a little bit higher up the table.
Yeah, and that type of financial clout and financial backing will be the envy of Treaty United, Noel. I suppose it just goes to show, obviously Treaty in terms of finances probably, punching above their weight slightly in competing with the teams that they're competing with right now in the playoff series. But, that probably only lasts so long, and you do hear it from the camp, I suppose, Noel, as well, whenever Tommy Barrett is interviewed, they are urging the public to get behind the team in terms of businesses and so you can tell that there is I suppose, without saying desperation, there is a desire to get a lot more investment.
Yeah, and look, it's changed a lot as well. I mean, you look at it, and we would have talked about our budget, and it's not 100 years ago, but like at the time, you didn't have a women's team, a senior team, a couple of underage women's teams, and an under 14, a 15, a 17, and a 19 underage boys squads as well. And look, we all know now the expense, whether you're playing at home or away. If you're at home, you have the pitch rental and you have a physio, and if you're away, you probably have to organise a bus or a meal or something after. So there's certainly a massive massive draw in terms of finances. You know, it's not just one or two teams anymore. There's probably 8 or 10 involved, and I'm sure that Treaty will be working hard to get people in, you know, to try and boost that budget. But certainly our geography, if you like, and location, and where we play, and with the University of Limerick at close hand, we certainly have a lot of advantage over some other areas as well.
Yeah, and obviously it's Treaty's second year, the Treaty United senior men's team's second year in the playoffs. Noel, we were delighted to get there last year as well, and we'll come on to maybe the game with UCD and the learnings from that soon. But you know, in terms of the overall scheme, the debate seems to be, you know, was it even a bigger achievement this year, Noel, do you think, in getting to the playoffs for Treaty, or do you think it was just an equally as good achievement as last season?
No, listen, it is a good achievement. You know, I don't see it as being a great achievement. I mean, you know, I'm just looking at the squads. I'm looking at the teams that are behind them. We would have said at the start of the season we didn't expect Treaty to compete with Cork and Waterford and Galway in particular. We mentioned Longford as well as being quite strong, having coming down from the Premier League. And look, they're the 4 teams that have finished above Treaty. We had them in for coming 4th or 5th. I think any team that, you know, that comes out of Limerick, you know, regardless of their budget, is certainly good enough to finish ahead of the likes of Athlone and Cove. And you spoke about Bray and their problems this year. And you know, look, it's great that it does make for a different first division now, the fact that, you know, you can be 6th or 7th in the table and still have a chance of achieving something by the end of the year. That's obviously something that's recent. I think it's good for the league. It keeps people involved more. And I just feel myself, I think that's where Treaty were going to finish. And they're in a cup semi-final that starts on Wednesday night.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned there that the game against UCD last year, the 2-legged affair against UCD, who eventually got promoted to the Premier Division, Noel. But you know, it's well documented that Treaty lost 3 goals on the opening night at the Marks Field against UCD, 3-0. Obviously, then made a game of it 2-0 at the Belfield Bowl until Stephen Christopher was sent off, and then UCD ended up scoring and wrapping up the tie on aggregate overall. So even though it finished on a disappointing note, they had their heads held high. I suppose what would the learnings be for you, Noel, or the lessons learned by Tommy Barrett and the players going in? What lessons should they have learned, should I say, going into this year's playoffs?
Yeah, I think, look, alive second leg and make sure that the tie is still alive. And I think they will have learned that. And even in the Derry game, you know, it was just surprising that they didn't go out in that mindset as well. They seemed to be very kind of gung-ho the first 10 or 15 minutes, and then found themselves 2-0 down. And I'm sure, you know, we're talking about what happened in UCD last year. They'll certainly be looking at what happened in UCD a couple of weeks ago. And look, it's only maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago since they played Waterford themselves. And, you know, the issues, if you like, are fairly obvious. And I think it's very, very important that they're not kind of stretched out. I've seen the team and they seem to be very stretched out from penalty box to penalty box, particularly the first 50 minutes against Derry and certainly below Waterford. And they've been punished for that. And I would expect a lot more kind of a conservative shape and setup with them on Wednesday night, which certainly last year in particular, and a lot of games this year as well, you know, we would have been disappointed at times that they didn't show a lot of ambition against the likes of Cove, in particular in games, yet they came out with the results. And I think that they need to look at that and maybe be quite conservative Wednesday night and just try and keep the tie alive and bring it to Waterford while it's still in the balance.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, Noel, the only worry with trying to keep we'll say the tie in the balance is our record against Waterford this season. Started off really well, actually, the record against Waterford. We mentioned the Munster Senior Cup win early in the season, which I know some people say is a glorified friendly, but that was a win in UL. But the first league win was at the Marks Field. Treaty got a 2-1 victory on the night. But since then, it's been 3 defeats. You've had a 4-0 defeat at the RSC, a 2-1 defeat at the Marks Field, and then a 3-0 defeat only a couple of weeks ago at the RSC as well. So, I mean, looking at the 7-0 aggregate scoreline at the RSC, I'd say a lot of people might be thinking, would Treaty want to actually take a lead to the second leg?
Certainly, no doubt, it's going to be difficult, and Waterford are a very good side and a very attack-minded side. But the other side of it is that you probably learn more from your defeats than your wins, and if that's the case, they certainly have to learn the lessons. There was similar frailties, if you like, from the home match that we saw, and then the most recent away game, and that was how they didn't deal with the wide threats and how exposed the Treaty full backs were to that kind of twin-pronged attack that comes from the right and the left-hand side of Waterford. And I felt I have touched on this in a few matches lately, is the makeup of the midfield and exactly their roles. And I thought that Jack Lynch, for example, didn't really know what he was about below Waterford. He was obviously very frustrated himself. We spoke about that yellow card for dissent he got, and I think the structure and the shape of the team is going to be really, really important on Wednesday night. And certainly, there probably is a setup to be done now with what they've learned in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think it's important they get what we think are the 11 best players on the pitch. And there is a very, very strong side, and we know that. Whether they can last it over the 2 legs is, obviously debatable at the moment, but certainly, you just get a foothold in the game and you stay in the game as long as you can. And I think they're certainly capable of doing that on Wednesday night. And after that, anything can happen.
Yeah, certainly. And I know that, the full backs for Treaty, Ben O'Riordan and Mark Ludden, we'll probably expect to start in the full back positions. We've no reason to believe otherwise, Noel. But they'll have their hands full as it is with Phoenix Patterson and Junior Caturna, respectively, on either side. But you did obviously refer to an area that we were worried about from the last game 2 weeks ago, which was the full backs. You've got Dara Power and Tamisa Sobowale from both sides that really drive on for Waterford, particularly at the RSC as well. I suppose the benefit from playing Waterford a couple of weeks ago is that, they hurt from the defeat, and the manner defeat is still fresh in the mind for Treaty United. I suppose one player who we've mentioned and referred to for a few times during the last few weeks has been Matt Keane, and the fact that we actually maybe thought he was a tiny bit out of sorts actually against Wexford last week, but maybe that comes with the being in and out of the team, maybe only making a few substitute appearances. But we were worried, Noel, about maybe the way that Power and Sobowale maybe were dominant against Willie Armstrong and Stephen Christopher. Do you think that, Tommy Barrett's going to give those guys a chance to rectify that issue? Or do you think that maybe there could be a change in the wide areas? Because McKean is really the only option, isn't he, at this point?
Yeah, well, I just touched on it a while ago. I think Willie Armstrong will start. I think there's no doubt he will start. But I think you could see Lee Devitt playing on the left. I think the fact that he played left full on Friday night, and in my head he was always a kind of a left-sided player. He certainly has the legs as well in terms of his running ability, and I think it's important to get someone over there who can get up and down the pitch to certainly protect Mark Ludden, because for all Mark brings, and he's been a fantastic player. He's had a really bright couple of years with Treaty. You can see him, like, when the game opens up and he's kind of exposed to one-on-ones, particularly around the halfway line, that he does struggle to get back. And that's no disrespect to him, because he's had a great career and he's been playing for 13 or 14 years, a lot of mileage on the clock. And, he is so important to Treaty. You could see how much they missed him on Friday night. So I think someone like Lee Devitt in front of him, I think if he wants to get the central midfield right, he needs to have Mark Walsh and Jack Lynch maybe sitting. I think Jack certainly does a lot better from there. I wasn't quite sure what he was doing against Derry. He seemed to be running around a lot, but not really contributing. And it was just really baffling, to be honest with you, to see him trying to pick up Noel O'Keefe as a sitter, below Waterford, and then about 40 or 50 yards of a gap between him and the other 2 midfielders. I said lately, I think Stephen Christopher, best performances and most consistent over maybe 4 or 5 games when he was playing in what I call that number 10 role.
Yeah.
Where obviously when you're out of possession, you're a third midfielder.
And he did say, Noel, in an interview with me recently, Stephen Christopher, that he was a bit coy about it, but when I asked him where his favourite position was, that's where he said he preferred playing, being in the thick of the action there as a number 10 third midfielder.
Yeah, so I think with Jack Lynch and Mark Walsh sitting, 2 strong guys, 2 experienced guys, I think Mark Walsh's form has been really, really good and probably understated. It was no surprise that he actually was probably the only player I think who played against Derry who played the full match on Friday night. Just so important to that team. He's understated work. I think Stephen Christopher at number 10, and obviously out of possession, dealing with Noel O'Connor. You've obviously Enda Curran, who does well up top in his own. He's well able to hold up the ball and bring people in, and you can bring the likes of Willie Armshaw in on the counter-attack, which does suit Treaty as well. And I said it here before, make sure you're solid on one side. You know, you can have a bit of a gamble on the other side. We'll say that's Willie Armshaw. Maybe not be too adventurous. Sit in your own half and kill that space. Don't be letting all that space free for the Waterford wide players to run through. You know, just get a foothold in the game. Be very careful and take your chances with the set plays. They are going to get opportunities with Mark Ludden throws and probably deliveries from Mark and the likes of Stephen Christopher as well. A couple of real good guys like Callum McNamara, Shane Gearns, Mark Walsh, Jack Lynch in the box. You know, you'd have to think that they have a chance if they go with that lineup. And I think that's the lineup that they should go for. And that's the kind of formation and, you know, way that they should tactically think about playing the game.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I do know that Tommy Barrett did use Lee Devitt in that left-hand side role an awful lot with Limerick FC, I remember in 2019. So maybe that's a way to go about it, actually. Noel, there is one player who we haven't seen an awful lot of against Treaty, and that is the striker for Waterford who actually scored last week in their final game against Athlone in Washam, Austria. I know Raul Uche scored against Treaty recently. A real continental Waterford side with Alex Baptiste there actually as well, the former Blackpool player. But in terms of, you know, you're probably hoping for one of those nights from Callum McNamara and Sean Gearns, because you know yourself, like those two players certainly have a huge performance in them when it's asked, but they'll certainly need it on Friday because by all accounts, Austria has really hit the ground running and is a fan favourite with Waterford.
Yeah, and I'm delighted with the way you've been practicing your Waterford United or your Waterford FC pronunciations as well. Look, Shane and Callum, they're really good. You know, particularly Callum, I think as a young player, you know, there'll probably be talk about him going elsewhere as well. I'd say by the end of the season, he certainly looks to me like a guy who, you know, who has a chance of making it. Maybe full-time training would suit him better. He needs to improve in his passing and maybe his technical ability, but certainly has the mindset and the mentality and the strength and power to be a good HSC League player. And look, they're going to relish whoever they come up against there. You have to remember as well, if Treaty can nullify the wide flanks a little bit, it'll certainly cut off a lot of that supply that the likes of the strikers that you've mentioned there kind of relish and play off. So the key is to cut out the supply from the wide areas and maybe make them channel more balls down the middle and have the likes of Jack Lynch and Mark Walsh to break up the play and then look to play on the counter-attack. And if they do that, I think they certainly have a great chance.
Yeah, and Noel, I do remember maybe sitting here after the UCD first leg last year, and we were, you know, I suppose we were very disappointed for Ty Grine because Ty Grine had an unbelievable season in general and then made probably his biggest mistake of the season in the playoff game. I suppose in terms of confidence-wise, certainly wouldn't have any issue with Jack Brady between the sticks, but, you know, because of the level of attack Waterford, you know, the level of quality they can produce in attack, he really is going to have a great game, and that's a great two legs really, and that goes without saying.
Absolutely, but you can't really look at the second leg now. And look, he was brilliant, I thought, against Derry as well. Probably was close enough to be man of the match. Seems to have really grown into the role. I think he's got a great temperament. Seems to be nice and positive around his team as well. I think they've actually grown in confidence with him as the season has gone on. And look, he's a guy that's really on form. And you're right, listen, if you want to beat a team that's a couple of rungs ahead of you, you certainly have to have your keeper in form, and you certainly don't want him to be making any mistakes and giving away easy goals, and they certainly can't afford to do that on Wednesday night.
Outside of the outside of the season where Limerick FC ran away with the first division title, Noel, I don't remember the record of Limerick senior soccer teams being unbelievably good anyway in Waterford. What's your own memories, Noel, in when managing Limerick teams in Waterford? I suppose that there was a bit of a split in terms of the division. Waterford were probably in Premier a lot as well during your time, were they?
Yeah, I do remember being down there one year, I think it was the first year they could well have won the league. I think they beat us to win the league. Very, very strong side, probably in '02 or maybe the
Yeah,
following
that
year. I'm
sounds
not
about right.
sure, but I remember then the second time a great cup match there where they were 1-0 up for most of the game, and we brought John O'Sullivan on from Carberley, and he did one of his magic tricks, and we got a penalty to force a replay. I think they were beaten in the replay. Obviously, I remember a lot more being involved with Wexford because that's that local rivalry as well. And towards the end of my time in Wexford, we certainly had a couple of really good wins there. I remember Gary Sheehan scoring the winner one night, and we coming out with a great 1-0 victory. But
Were you
it
always
is always difficult.
well behaved in the RSC? I can't remember if you told me a story about having to be escorted from the pitch.
Yeah, I do remember being thrown out of the ground all right the last time. But I also, in my defence, the chairman came down to Wexford the following week to apologise to me for the behaviour of some of his overzealous stewards. But look, it's all part of the fun and the rivalry. But certainly, listen, there's going to be nothing easy for Treaty this week.
Absolutely not, and it would be remiss of me not to even mention the other semi-final clash between Galway and Longford. Noel, it's been well documented, obviously, that Galway have not been in good form coming into the last part of the season, the last round of fixtures, really. A lot of unrest, Noel, to be honest. The way people talk about momentum going into playoffs, and in fairness, Treaty United's form hasn't been too bad. Waterford are really flying into the playoffs. Longford, maybe a bit similar to Treaty in terms of results, but Galway haven't been in good form. And then you've got, a lot of fans on the back of John Caulfield and the back of the board going into the playoffs, which is fairly ominous. There was a lot of shadow boxing as well, Noel, last week between Galway and Longford playing each other. I mean, they'll play each other 3 times in the space of maybe 8 days. So they had a 3-3 draw in that game. But I suppose Caulfield then as well. You had Caulfield taking on Gary Cronin, who surprisingly with Bray Wanderers crushed Galway in the playoffs last year as well, and got to the final against UCD of the first division round. A lot of subplots going into this one, Noel.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, I did feel that I spoke to John Caulfield after the recent game in Marcus Field, and I just felt that he did feel a bit of pressure down on him. There's certainly pressure on that team. They're full time, and the public expects us, like, they seem to be not playing with a spring in their step. But I still think that they're probably good enough over 2 legs to get over Longford, I think. And if they do, like, all bets will be off in terms of them getting to the final. In fairness to John, whatever people say about them, if you look back at their results, they may well have been struggling in matches, but nearly 9 times out of 10, it's a late winner or a late equaliser out of them, which shows that there is something right there. They probably have not done as well as they thought to do this year, but they won't really mind what way they do go up. And if they can beat Longford and get into the final, then it might be difficult to bet against them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this playoff series is all about coming out as winners. It's nothing to do with performances, as the managers will probably tell you themselves, Noel. But on behalf of myself and Noel and everyone supporting Limerick, we'd obviously hope to wish Treaty United the best of luck going into the playoff series. We'll be there ourselves, Noel, hopefully with a lot of other people at the Markets Field on Wednesday night, and hopefully the weather is better than it's been, maybe a bit more like yesterday and not like this evening where there's been quite a bit of heavy rain. But obviously wish the whole of Treaty United Football Club the best of luck, and we will be back with you maybe hopefully during the week before to preview the second leg at the RSC as well. So thank you.